We are returning to Innistrad with Innistrad Midnight Hunt. So I'm ready to dive into the set with you and think about its applications for Cube. Welcome to Cultic Cube, where we cube religiously. We make you better at Cube and make your cube better. I've been super excited to return to Innistrad. As some of you will know, I started my Cube journey in the wake of our first visit to Innistrad. I loved that draft format so much that I gathered together a bunch of draft chaff and started building my own draft environment. Midnight Hunt seems like a sweet, flavorful set. It's interesting too for being a set that I think I misjudged initially. As the spoilers were coming out, I was paying attention. I was commenting on Twitter on many of the cards spoiled. There were cards that looked sweet, but the overall power level of the set looked pretty low to me, which is totally fine. I just didn't expect to get a ton of cards out of the set for my cubes. But as I've been mulling over the full spoiler, I've found more and more cards. With every pass through the spoiler, I've found more cards to add for both of the cube environments that I plan to talk about in these reviews. Today, in this review, we're going to be talking about cards I am adding to Adaline, which is my vintage unpowered 450 card cube. This is an environment that I talk about a lot in my videos, so you're probably familiar with it and some of its design principles. I think rather than go through in Wooburg order, I'd like to start by picking out the cards that I'm most excited about from the set for Adaline. And you may not be totally shocked to hear that the cards I'm most excited about are cantrips and removal. And boy, we got some good options here in both of those categories. Let's start with an artifact, Jack-o'-lantern. This is a common. It costs 1 generic mana, and it's got 2 abilities. You can pay 1, tap, and sacrifice Jack-o'-lantern, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard, draw a card. It has a second ability. You can pay 1 and exile Jack-o'-lantern from your graveyard and add 1 mana of any color. So here's a funny sort of amalgam of abilities on this card. I think the card is super sweet though. So here's the thing. This is indeed a cantrip. It's an inexpensive cantrip, right? For a total of 2 mana and 2 mana that you're paying across an installment plan, this card replaces itself. So that's a perfectly reasonable rate, and this is a colorless card after all, so this can go in any deck. Also, it's a super cheap artifact. It's a turn 1 play, which, as well you know, is great in all kinds of artifact-centric strategies. It does some other stuff too, of course. It does some color filtering type thing once it's in the yard. It gets an artifact in your yard, which lets you turn on some delirium thing, I suppose, if you're into that. And also you may well have ways of recurring artifacts and looping them, like maybe with Trading Post or Goblin Welder. I mean, I know this isn't the artifact you're hoping to weld probably, but you could get something going whereby you keep recurring this and sacking it and drawing cards. But all that aside, this is 2 generic mana for a cantrip that you don't even have to pay all at once. I'm hype about this. This is maybe the single card that I'm most excited about in the set. Okay, let's talk about the other cantrip, and this is Consider. Here's another common. Costs a single blue mana for an instant. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. Draw a card. Wow. So we got an opt that has Surveil on it. This is the card that many of us have been hoping for, I believe, since Surveil was introduced back in Guilds of Ravnica 2-3 years ago. It's a great effect. It's much better than scrying. Putting something in the yard, it has all sorts of advantages, of course. We like being able to bin stuff because it's much more often that you have a way to interact with your graveyard, to use it as another extended pool of resources, extended hand, than your library, which is harder to manipulate and find cards from and so on. Binning things is great. So Consider this is awesome. It's a single blue mana, instant speed, and it replaces itself. And you get a little bit of choice in the matter. Those are the important, inexpensive cantrips. Now let's talk removal. Let's talk white removal first. So the first among these is a common, and it's called Candle Trap. Costs a single white mana. It's an enchantment, aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature has Defender. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt by enchanted creature. And then it's got Coven. 2 and a white, sacrifice Candle Trap, exile enchanted creature. Activate only if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. The Coven thing I think we can basically ignore. Coven sort of annoys me as a mechanic. So Coven checks whether you have 3 creatures on the field that have different powers. What a weird deck building constraint. And it doesn't seem like you're ever sculpting a deck around this turning on Coven. And getting 3 creatures on the board can be a big ask to begin with, let alone 3 creatures that have this other weird stipulation about different power. So I would ignore Coven entirely. We have then a kind of a pacifism effect. It's not entirely pacifism. The creature can block, it can't attack, it can block, but no damage is dealt. So the creature that you enchant can still act as a roadblock to you, but nevertheless, we take the creature out of the combat game pretty effectively. This card is one that I haven't seen just a ton of people get excited about, although I've been chatting about it with my friend Sniffy Gull on Twitter lately, and this is one that he's been championing. I think this card looks really good. It's no Swords to Plowshares, of course, but it does cost a single white for an effect that's pretty close to a pacifism. It also doesn't stack up that favorably against pacifism in terms of its actual effect, but again, this costs a single white mana. So this extraordinarily inexpensive interaction is super premium. Here's another white removal spell. This one is a rare, Fateful Absence. It costs 1 and a white for an instant. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Its controller investigates. So this is one of the later spoiled cards. It came as a nice surprise. This is largely an upgrade, I think, to Declaration in Stone, which you may remember from Shadows over Innistrad. Declaration in Stone costs 1 and a white for a sorcery, and it says exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature. That player investigates for each non-token creature exiled this way. So look, there are pluses and minuses to this card compared to Declaration in Stone. The biggest downside, of course, is that it can't hit multiple targets. So Declaration in Stone, in my experience, it was sort of rare for you to be able to really get somebody with this and take out a whole bunch of their goblins or something in one fell swoop, but it could happen. Here, though, I think this is largely better, right? This is instant speed removal. It can hit a planeswalker in addition to hitting a creature. That's great. You pay your opponent a clue for their trouble, so they do get to replace the card, but they have to pay 2 to do that. So that's kind of nice. They don't just get a straight up free card like they do in the case of Path to Exile, for example, where they get to find a land and put it into play. Premium white removal, unrestricted removal, even hits planeswalkers. Wow, I mean, this is great. Also, of course, Declaration in Stone, I guess I should make clear, exiles, whereas this destroys. So you are allowing them to bin the thing. So that is downside compared to the other, but this, this looks better. Now, let's do black removal. Infernal Grasp. Okay, before I even read this card, let's take a moment and recall that it was just in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, the last major set, which came out a month and a half ago or something, not long ago, that we got a super premium new terror or Doomblade effect called Power Word Kill. And in my set review for AFR, you may recall I went through and found all of the all of the creatures that Power Word Kill would miss on. And the card is just excellent. It only missed on 3% of the creatures in the cube. And it may be better or worse for you, but it's probably excellent unless you've got the Angels and Demons tribal cube or whatever. Okay, so now fast forward a matter of weeks and we get an uncommon from Midnight Hunt called Infernal Grasp for 1 and a black. It's an instant and it says destroy target creature. You lose 2 life. So this is actually entirely unrestricted creature destruction at instant speed for 1 and a black. And the only drawback is that you have to pay 2 life. So this is amazing. It misses on absolutely nothing. Okay. Now let's look at some red spells. These are going to be burn spells. You won't be shocked to learn. So the first is Cathartic Pyre. It's an uncommon. It costs 1 and a red for an instant. It's a modal spell. It says choose 1. Cathartic Pyre deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Then the second mode is discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards. Here we've got a Searing Spear variant that's modal, like a Braid, and a Braid, excellent card. A Braid deals 3 damage to target creature, or it can shatter an artifact. Similar idea, deal 3 damage to target creature, or planeswalker, which is nice. It doesn't hit players, but we can't have it all, I guess. And then the second mode is you get to rummage 2. So this is just the perfect card, right? Most of the time you're probably going to deal damage with it, but you draw this later in the game in your aggressive red deck, and you get to pitch some lands and find gas. That's awesome. But also, this can function as a sort of faithless looting that's instant speed, that costs 2 instead of 1, that doesn't have flashback. But anyway, you know what I mean. It's a relatively inexpensive way to let you pitch cards for a reanimator strategy or something like that. Really quite excellent. Okay, another red burn spell. This is Play with Fire, costs a single red pip. It is an uncommon, an instant. Play with Fire deals 2 damage to any target. If a player is dealt damage this way, scry 1. So here's a shock. It has this small upside that if you happen to send it to face, then you get to scry 1. So small upside, conditional upside, but nevertheless, I like shocks. I run a lot of them. I run a lot of removal, as you probably know, in Aleasis, both spot removal and also sweepers and this kind of thing. I think they're great, and I like this axis of interaction. So I do run in the cube Literal Shock and Tarfire and Wild Slash. I run Spikefield Hazard that just deals 1 damage to something, but as an MDFC. What else? Galvanic Blast, Burst Lightning. I run a lot of these kinds of effects. Some of them have, 0 upside tacked onto them like Shock, and I think they're still fine cards. Here's another variation on that does a little something extra, and I like it. All right, so now let's get into some of the other cards. All right, first of all, we have Adaline, Resplendent Cathar. This is a card, I am going to go ahead and test it. White Wolf 123 was selling me on this on Twitter. He and I have had some back and forth about it. He's run some math and found that she is able to pile on damage pretty quickly. I was pretty down on her, but I'm happy to try her. And I can certainly see how she snowballs, but I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess. Let me back up and read you the card. So this is a rare. Her name is Adaline, Resplendent Cathar. She's a legendary creature, human knight. She costs 1 white. She is a star power and 4 toughness. So how do we figure out her power? Let's read the card. She's got vigilance. Her power is equal to the number of creatures you control. Whenever you attack, for each opponent, create a 1/1 white human creature token that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. Here we have something that looks quite a bit like Brimas, of course. We've got a white Rabblemaster kind of variant, and I must say that I like white getting pushed in the Rabblemaster direction because many of you, I'm sure, will have been around in the cube community long enough to remember that it used to be we'd bemoan the quality of red 3s until we got Rabblemaster, and then WotC just kept printing Rabblemasters, and now red 3s are fine, and in fact there are red 3s that may be better than Rabblemaster variants in various ways now. White, there hasn't been such a dearth of quality white 3s, but I'm happy to get some effects like Brimas in this slot. Also, the type line is better than Brimas here, since this is a human and a knight, I suppose. Brimas is a cat. What is he? A cat soldier, maybe? Yeah, he's a cat soldier. Adaline can, after a few turns, end up representing more damage than Brimas does. Happy to give this knight a whirl. I will say, though, my reservation about her is I look at this card and I see a 3-mana 1/4, and I'm not super excited about that, right? Aleasis is an environment that, as we've said, goes hard into wraths. It goes hard into spot removal. So in Adaline, I see a kind of Baneslayer Angel, or she's at a risk of being a Baneslayer Angel, where here's a card that can do an awful lot. There's no denying that. But the floor on her is really quite low. Right, 1/4 as a floor is bad. 1/4 that eats a Doomblade or eats a Infernal Grasp. That's not a great card. Much of the same can be said about Brimas, of course, though. To be clear, I don't think that Brimas is an exceptional card in this year of ours, 2021, either. I think there are many better options than Brimas now, and I'm down on Baneslayer variants generally, as I'm sure you know. Anyway, we'll try her. Okay, what's up next? Brutal Cathar. This is 2 and a white for a creature, human, soldier, werewolf. It's a rare. It's a 2/2. When this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Brutal Cathar, exile target creature an opponent controls until this creature leaves the battlefield. And this is the Daybound side of the card. So Midnight Hunt introduces the Daybound and Nightbound concept as a way of codifying the werewolf ability and putting a name to it. The werewolf ability on flip cards that was introduced back in the first Innistrad in 2011. Awkwardly, the old cards don't interact with Daybound and Nightbound in quite the same way. I mean, they don't care about Daybound and Nightbound at all. So mixing werewolves can be an awkward thing. I don't just love introducing this whole Daybound and Nightbound thing for people to keep track of if we were just doing it for one card, for example, because that just seems like an additional headache for very little payoff if it's one card. However, I am testing more than one card. I don't know what that number is off the top of my head. I'd say at least 3 or maybe 4 cards that care about day and night. So I'm willing to buy into it for science. So Brutal Cathar, here we've got a Fiend Hunter variant, and this is a pretty good Fiend Hunter variant. It's better than, Fiend Hunter proper and Banisher Priest and this kind of thing. It's not as good as the recent Skyclave Apparition that we got in Zendikar Rising. That one's super good because it doesn't actually give the thing back. It instead returns a token to them. It does have some targeting restrictions. Skyclave Apparition does, right? It can only hit things that cost 4 CMC or less, or 4 MV or less. However, it just hits non-token permanents, which is really good that it's not just creatures. Anyway, this thing hits creatures. It has the ability to get multiple things, which is really cool. And it has the ability to flip into a 3/3 first strike that has some nominal protection So the backside of this card is Moonrage Brute. And Moonrage Brute is a 3/3 creature werewolf, has first strike, has ward, pay 3 life, and it is Nightbound. This looks like a fine card. Next white card, Intrepid Adversary. This is the first of the Adversary cycle. I'm testing a couple of these. This one looks like the best by far and away. This is a mythic. Intrepid Adversary costs 1 and a white for a creature, human scout. That's 3 power, 1 toughness. It has lifelink, and when Intrepid Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a white any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many Valor counters onto Intrepid Adversary, and then creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Valor counter on Intrepid Adversary. This is super sweet. Okay, so at base, we've got 2 mana for a good aggressive creature, a 3/1 with lifelink. We could quibble and say we'd rather have first strike than lifelink or something, some more aggressive leaning keyword, but whatever. For 2 mana, we get a 3/1 with a keyword on it. That's not unreasonable. Of course, the card gets better from there. So for 4 mana, you get effectively a 4/2 lifelink that is an Anthem. It's this walking Anthem, where by Anthem I mean something like Glorious Anthem, right? Honor of the Pure, one of these kinds of things. All your creatures get +1/+1 for each Valor counter on this thing. And of course you can dump more mana into this. So you draw this late game and you can cast it for 8 or whatever. All of a sudden, all your creatures are +3/+3. I like it. And just to say, there was a time back a few years ago now when I was running Benelish Marshal from Dominaria. This was a creature, human knight that costs white, It's a 3/3, and it says other creatures you control get +1/+1. This thing was kind of fine. I mean, it only went in exactly white weenie strategy, right? Because the casting cost is ridiculous at white. It's a 3 mana 3/3, so it's a Centaur Courser. This isn't getting us super excited, but it's this walking Anthem, and that's good. So this was fine if you play it on curve. It was a fine late draw. It suddenly makes your team bigger. It was a reasonable-ish card, not an embarrassing card. But the casting cost was embarrassing, and we want more for our 3s, honestly, today. So this card's sort of similar. It costs 4, but you end up with a 4/2 lifelink Anthem. We've got another blue spell, Memory Deluge. This is a rare. Costs 2 blue for an instant. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And it has flashback for 5 blue, so for 7 mana value. Here's a super interesting Factor Fiction / Dig Through Time hybrid. It's got flashback. This is very cool. So Factor Fiction, as you probably know, I'm off. I've been off it for a good while. I think that it's a beloved card. This thing, honestly, 4 mana is, still a hard sell, but I think this is better than Factor Fiction. When you cast this on its face, you're looking at 4 cards, and you just get to pick 2. Factor Fiction, you look at 5 cards, and you have the whole dance with your opponent where they separate things. But you picking the 2 best card among your top 4 is going to be better on average than, I think, selecting between the piles that your opponent gives you among your top 5. Now, with Factor Fiction, you get to bin the others, so that has very real upside in some cases. So this is a downside to Memory Deluge, that it bottoms them instead of bins them. And then it's got flashback, and the flashback costs an arm and a leg. It costs 7. You get to look at an awful lot of cards and get the best ones among them. It costs a huge amount, and unlike Dig Through Time, there's no cost reduction built in the form of Delve, of course, in Dig Through Time. Flashback, maybe not super duper relevant, but it's going to come up, right? And when it does come up, I'm going to be real happy that I'm able to look at 7 cards and find my 2 best ones. I think this is a sweet card. I'm giving it a whirl. Given that I don't love Factor Fiction, I'm not sure I'm going to love this card either, but I want to try it out. And if you are cubing Factor Fiction, this is a serious contender for replacing it. All right, black. The only black card I'm looking at is Infernal Grasp, so we already talked about that. Let's move on. We got a couple other red cards to look at. One is Bloodthirsty Adversary. This is a mythic. It costs 1 red. It's a creature vampire. It's a 2/2. So this is the red adversary, of course. So this thing has haste. When Bloodthirsty Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 and a red any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Bloodthirsty Adversary, then exile up to that many instants and or sorcery cards with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard and copy them. You may cast any number of the copies without paying their mana costs. Here's a card I've seen a lot of people super excited about. I think it's a perfectly reasonable card, but I'm less high on it than I think some people may be. So here's what I see when I see this card. I see a Haste Bear, a 2 mana 2/2 with haste. This isn't an unreasonable card. You could put this in your Red Deck Wins deck and your Sly deck and be okay with it. But we've got plenty better options here, even somewhat recent ones like Robber of the Rich from Eldraine, 2 mana 2/2 with reach and haste, and then the whole thing where you get to cast your opponent's cards if you jump through some hoops and whatever. That puts this card to shame, at least at its base rate. But you can go further back and get something like Ash Zealot, right, which is 2/2 with haste and first strike and some other stuff. And that was from Return to Ravnica. Anyway, I'm just listing red 2-drops, but the point is you can do better for your red 2-drops. But of course, this thing has additional abilities. So you could cast this thing on 5, and for that, what are you going to get? You're going to get a 3/3 haste creature, and you're going to get to flashback a Syrian Spear or something, right? Well, what this adds up to me, is we've got a modal Flametongue Kavu type creature. And that seems fine, right? That seems fine. but I'm not getting that excited about it. And of course, you could dump more mana into it, but like how likely is it that you're paying 8 mana to flashback 2 things? Wow. And to get a 4/4, right? I don't know. Now, look, in Aleasis, I don't support Storm, obviously, and I can certainly see the argument that this could be better in the Storm deck, and I mean, maybe it's exactly what you want in that deck. That's awesome. Anyway, card looks okay. This card I'm more excited about, falconrath Pit Fighter. It's a rare, costs a single red pip for a 2/1. It's a creature vampire warrior, and it has the ability pay 1 in a red, discard a card, and sacrifice a vampire. Draw 2 cards. Activate only if an opponent lost life this turn. So we got a bunch of Jackal Pups. We get more and more Jackal Pups. Used to be Jackal Pup meant having a downside, no more. This thing has a whole bunch of upside. So look, this is another 2-power creature for a red deck that costs a single red mana pip. Red decks want as many of these kinds of things as they can lay their hands on, and it doesn't matter what the text box says. This text box, far from having a downside like Jackal Pup, it in fact has upside in that you get to cash this card in for more cards later. It's not like you're getting ahead on cards, because you do have to discard a card and you do have to sacrifice a vampire, which is presumably this thing, but doesn't have to be, of course. So you lose out on 2 cards and you get to draw 2 more cards. This could be relevant, right? I mean, I don't know how often you're going to do this thing. I mean, this thing is essentially valuable as a 1 mana 2/1. That's why you're putting this in your deck, but it's nice that it's got this additional upside and can find you more cards later. All right, moving on to green. We haven't talked much about green yet, but green's got some things. They're all creatures. Shocker, I know. So first, Briarbridge Tracker. This is a rare. It's 2 and a green for a 2/3 creature human scout. It's got vigilance. When Briarbridge Tracker enters the battlefield, investigate. As long as you control a token, Briarbridge Tracker gets +2/+0. This is kind of a cool card. It replaces itself, not immediately, but on an installment plan, like Thraben Inspector. And it's a 3 mana 4/3, effectively, in green, which is a reasonable body. It is 2021, and a 3 mana 4/3 maybe doesn't actually look all that pushed. But it's, it hits hard, and it's a relatively beefy kind of thing. It's got vigilance for whatever it's worth. Of course, it loses that power buff when you cash in that token. I'm going to try it out. This thing looks worth trying. Oh, also, let me put in a plug for the Cultic Bestiary, which I hope some of you have had a chance to check out. I've been creating a series of tokens of my own design that look as if they are straight out of the pages of a medieval illuminated manuscript, a medieval bestiary. I've got tons of these. I've got over 50 tokens now. They're available for sale on Etsy. And I've got a whole series of clue tokens, for example. I've got 3 different designs of clue tokens. I think they're pretty sweet. Check those out if you'd like at culticube at etsy.com. Also, you can support the work I do on this channel by becoming a patron on Patreon, and there's all sorts of cool perks that attend patronage there. And I have affiliate relationships with TCG Player, Inked Gaming, and Amazon, so do check out my affiliate links in the description. So thanks for your support. All right, next up, Primal Adversary. This is a mythic for 2 and a green. It's a creature wolf, and it's a 4/3. So here's the green adversary. It has trample, and when Primal Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a green any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Primal Adversary. Then, up to that many target lands you control become 3/3 wolf creatures with haste that are still lands. All right, this is kind of a funny card, but I think a good one. So the base rate is we've got a 3 mana 4/3 with trample, which sounds a lot like Briarbridge Tracker we were just talking about, who's a 3 mana 4/3 with vigilance and a clue token. So the rate seems okay as a floor, but it can get a lot better. So for 5 mana, you get to put a counter on this. So you're getting a 5/4, and you're turning a land into a 3/3 wolf. So for 5 mana, you're getting 8 power and 7 toughness on 2 creatures. Oof, that's a pretty big game. And now we're very much in Thragtusk territory, right? I mean, not that this is the same card at all, but, that kind of value that we're looking at, it's sort of in the ballpark. Also, I mean, speaking of Thragtusk, I think Thragtusk and I think Restoration Angel, the two are indelibly paired in my mind. But just to say, a sweet thing about all of the adversary cycle, is the additional cost isn't kicker or multi-kicker or whatever, which is to say you don't have to pay the cost when you're casting a spell. Rather, you pay the cost on ETB. So if you do blink Primal Adversary with Restoration Angel or whatever, you can pay the additional mana into whatever adversary we're blinking and get the effect all over again. Anyway, Primal Adversary, for 5 you get a creature. At 7, you get 2 3/3s out of the deal, in addition to the now not 4/3, but instead 6/5. So for 7 mana, you can get a 6/5 and 2 3/3s. All of these things sound quite good. If you pay 5 mana into this thing, the land that you animate is probably going to be tapped. My friend Zolthux mentioned this in conversation. This card has an interesting play pattern whereby it scales almost like it looks like it should scale in increments of 2, and it does, but there's also a way in which there are these sort of half steps, whereby at 5 you get a creature that enters tapped, versus at 6 you make that creature enter untapped. At 7 you get 2 extra creatures, one of which is presumably tapped. At 8 you get the 2 extra creatures, but both untapped. Anyway, a cool card. I wish it just made tokens. I wish it just made wolf tokens, but it's hard to complain. And I guess this way they didn't have to mix 2/2 and 3/3 wolf tokens in the same set. So it allowed them to calibrate the size of the creatures this thing is creating differently. Anyway, I'm all about it. This looks like a good card. Okay, next up, Tovalars Huntmaster. This guy's a rare. Tovalars Huntmaster is 4 green for a creature, human werewolf, and it's a 6/6. When Tovalars Huntmaster enters the battlefield, create 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. And this is daybound. So it's got a nighttime side where it is called Tovalars Pack Leader for a creature werewolf. It's a 7/7. When Tovalars Pack Leader enters the battlefield or attacks, create 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. And it has an activated ability for 2 green. Another target wolf or werewolf you control fights target creature you don't control. So that's cool. You can make your wolves fight things. That's pretty sweet. And that also is an ability that is reminiscent of Master of the Wild Hunt. That's kind of nice. But of course, as you will have noticed, this thing looks a great deal on the whole like a green Grave Titan, in that it brings 2 friends along with it. Notice that on the daytime side of this card, it doesn't create wolves on attack, unlike Grave Titan. Grave Titan, when it ETBs or when it attacks, it makes its 2/2 zombie friends. However, on the flip side of this card, Tovalar's Pack Leader, on the nighttime side of this card, it does create 2/2 green wolf creature tokens when it ETBs or when it attacks. So that's kind of confusing, and it caused some confusion when the card was spoiled because it was mistranslated into English. Anyway, neither here nor there. This card looks, I don't know, fine. I mean, better than fine, I suppose. But it does cost 6 mana, so I like this better than Primeval Titan, unless you've got a good reason to want Primeval Titan. I've talked about this, of course, in different places. I've got a whole video. Is Prime Time past his prime? I'm going to go ahead and take credit for Tovalar's Pack Leader. Mark Rosewater watched that video and was like, oh man, Primetime is past his prime, just like John says. We need to go back to the drawing board, figure something out. Let's make Primetime look more like Gravy Train. So yes, you all are welcome. I'm just being silly. Maro hasn't watched that video. This card's cool. I don't know. It looks like Grave Titan, worse Grave Titan in some respects. It's got some upsides in other respects, which is super cool. Ultimately, it's a 6 mana green creature, which is like a slightly weird spot. You can natural order into this thing, and that's going to happen some number of times. That's cool. But like, you kind of want a better natural order target than this sort of dorky 6 mana thing. You know, if you ramp into this thing sometimes, that's cool. I don't know. 6 mana is a weird spot for green. At least in Aleasis, it's in a weird spot. It's an awkward in-between spot where I want either actual mid-range threats that are more efficient and that I can actually get out more quickly and beat down with, or if I'm into cheating with green, then I want to think way bigger in my cheating than a 6 mana creature. All right, let us move on to just a couple of gold cards. So here's the one planeswalker I'm into. She's a mythic, of course. Her name is Arlen, the Pack's Hope. She's 2 red-green. Legendary planeswalker Arlen. She has 4 loyalty, and she flips around. So here's her daybound side. She's got a +1. Until your next turn, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And then she's got a -3. Create 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. And then on her nightbound side, she's got a +2, which is add a red and a green mana. So you add 2 mana total, 1 red, 1 green. And then she's got a 0. Until end of turn, Arlen the Moon's Fury becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. This looks like an exciting planeswalker. It's a gold planeswalker. Gold cards are a hard sell, as you probably know, for me. So gold cards, they've got a pretty high bar to meet. This is, well, a couple of things. For one thing, this is a 4 mana gold card granted, but for 4 mana to get 2/2/2s, so that's not outrageous. And then it gets to do other sweet things. On the backside, she beats down. The other thing that she does with her plus on her front side is she puts counters on your creatures as they enter the battlefield. So if you support creature combo in the form of persist, then, well, she's a great persist enabler by putting counters on things and obviating the -1/-1 counter. So Arlen looks like a cool package. I think there's a lot going on here that's positive. I don't know if all of this amounts to a card that sticks around forever, but it's definitely something that I want to try. There's no ultimate per se, but she does have 4 abilities between the 2 faces. A 5/5 with trample, indestructible, and haste. That's a big beefy thing for 4 mana. This is her 0 on her backside. We'll try her. All right, last card that we're going to touch on is Faithful Mending. This is an uncommon. It costs white, blue. So 2 mana value total. It's an instant. You gain 2 life, you draw 2 cards, then you discard 2 cards. And it has flashback for 1 white, blue. Here's another Faithful Saluting kind of thing in Azorius colors, interestingly. This is a super sweet effect, I think, for us to get in Azorius colors, because you may very well want to get up to some graveyard shenanigans in here. And I don't know about you, but there's been many a time I've been in Reanimator and I've stuck red into the deck just for looting or rummaging effects with things like Faithful Saluting. I'm using red largely to pitch cards. So it's nice to be able to do that in Azorius, so then we could be in an Esper Reanimator shell or something and not have to worry about the red. Even if we're not reanimating something, here's a 2 mana instant speed card that's giving you card selection and a little bit of incidental life gain, and then you get to do it all over again. So this is drawing you quite a few cards for 5 total mana between the initial cost and the flashback cost. You're getting to draw 4 cards and discard 4 cards, granted. It's not straight up card draw, and gain 4 life. So this seems like a perfectly reasonable deal. I just don't know how likely I am to play this if I don't care about the graveyard. Probably not super duper likely, honestly. So maybe it's not worth a gold slot. And in Aleasis, I've swung away from Reanimator in the current build of Aleasis, but I may well be back there again soon, reanimating stuff. It's just not what we're doing right now. This is a card that should be on your radar, though. It's worth knowing about Faithful Mending, even if it doesn't seem correct for your particular environment. Okay, thanks for hanging in there, you guys. This was a discussion of my higher powered environment. Tune in next time for a discussion of the cards that I'll be adding to Petty Nobility, which is my master's power level environment. A lower power level, more synergy driven environment. So let's keep hanging out and chatting cube.